I Here we go. All right. So, okay. So I am just trying to also set up some options if people want to actually see this streamed, and I'm hoping all of this works. I'm kind of doing this sort of off the cuff here. And the reason that I decided to do this is that I'm just really excited about the amazing stuff that's going on in Cuba. It's pretty damn amazing, really. So if anybody's actually seeing this and they don't want to look at me, because I do kind of look shitty. I really don't care though. And they just want to hear it. I'm doing this, I think I'm also doing this on Spaces. So your choices. So here's the skinny. So the first time, I think it's 62 years, the Cuban people are rising up against, how do you even begin to, how do I even really begin to describe what it is that they're rising up against? I hope everybody can hear me. Hoping this was working. Hope it sounds okay. So what I decided I thought would be really cool to share is that there's a dissident whose name was Václav Havel. Now, what made Václav particularly really amazing was that he didn't only manage to survive Stalinism, which is no small feat, especially if you're a dissident and especially if you're a playwright, which is something else he was. He actually managed to become president of Czechoslovakia. And he had some pretty beautiful beliefs about hope. So what he would say is that hope is not the assurance that things are going to go, the way you want them to go. It's not the assurance that things are going to end the way you want them to end. So hope is not, in this case, like right now, hope is not the belief that we will see the Cuban people finally be liberated from communism. Gosh, look at me. That's not it. That's not what hope is. What hope actually is simply the belief that whatever is going on all around you makes sense. Hope is believing and knowing that something makes sense. That's what hope is. And you have to have a certain kind of, he used to say, a very certain kind of spiritual mentality about this. But he also had a really interesting sense of humor. And he wrote a article for Esquire magazine in 1993. It's really funny. And I want to share it with you guys, okay? So, it's called Never Hope Against Hope by Václav Havel. Allow me to tell you a little story about the nature of hope and absurdity. In 1989, only a few months before I was to become, to my bewilderment, an actual head of state, I survived my own death. I had arrived in the countryside outside of Prague at a place called Ukrilis, I think is how you pronounce it, to visit artist friends. After a feast by a bonfire, I led a friend who had been much too drunk down a dark path toward a house nearby. In this total darkness, though completely sober, I suddenly fell into a black hole surrounded by a cement wall. The fact is, I had landed into a sewer. into what can only be called, you'll excuse me, shit. My attempt to swim in this fundamental mud, this strange vegetation, it was in vain. And I began to sink deeper into the ooze. Meanwhile, a tremendous panic broke out above me. Local citizens flashed lights, grasped one another's arms, legs, offering limbs, articles of clothing to grab. A chaos of impossible rescue techniques followed. This brave fight for my life went on for at least 30 minutes. I could barely keep my nose above the dreadful effluvium and thought this was the end. What a way to go. When someone had the fine idea of putting down a ladder. Who would have known I was to leave this unfortunate sewer only to end up in the president's office 2 months later? I was not, after all, to have the distinction of becoming the first playwright to drown in shit in Orcalis. What was striking about the sewer experience was how hope had emerged from the hopelessness, from absurdity. I've always been deeply affected by the theater of the absurd. I've always been deeply affected by the theater of the absurd because, I believe, it shows the world as it is, in a state of crisis. It shows man having lost his fundamental metaphysical certainty, his relationship to the spiritual, the sensation of meaning, in other words, having lost the ground under his feet. As I've said in my book, Disturbing the Peace, this is a man for whom everything is coming apart, whose world is collapsing, whose sense he has irrevocably lost something, but is unable to admit this to himself, and therefore hides from it. Complete skepticism is an understandable consequence of discovering that one's enthusiasms are based in illusion. This skepticism leads to a dehumanization of history, a history drifting somewhere above us, taking its own course, having nothing to do with us, trying to cheat us, destroy us, playing out its cruel jokes. But history is not something that takes place elsewhere. It takes place here. We all contribute to making it. If bringing back some human dimension to the world depends on anything, it depends on how we acquit ourselves in the here and now. The kind of hope I often think about, especially in hopeless situations like prison or shit, is, I believe, a state of mind, not a state of the world. Either we have hope within us or we don't. Hope is not a prognostication. It's an orientation of the spirit. Each of us must find a real fundamental hope within himself. You can't delegate that to anybody else. Hope, in this deep and powerful sense, is not the same as joy when things go well, or willingness to invest in enterprises that are obviously headed for early success, but rather an ability to work for something to succeed. Hope is definitely not the same thing as optimism. It's not the conviction that something will turn out well, but the certainty that something makes sense, regardless of how it turns out. It is this hope, above all, that gives us strength to live and to continually try new things, even in conditions that seem as hopeless as ours do here and now. In the face of this absurdity, life is too precious a thing to permit its devaluation by living pointlessly, emptily, without meaning, without love. and finally, without hope. Pray for the people of Cuba and CubaLibre. We're all with you. If I can figure out how to end the stream.